What is up, guys? In this video, I'm going to be going over several tips to hopefully help you play better and more consistent in the early game of matches. As always, if you guys do enjoy this video, find it helpful, informative, interesting, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you like to see more, and comment down below a question you have about Fortnite or like a piece of advice you want. Like, one question that I get asked a lot is why I prefer the SUV cars to the regular cars. Things of that nature, comment it down below, and maybe I'll make a video kind of answering some questions if I get several good ones. The first thing for early game we're going to talk about is going to be landing, because obviously this is going to be very important. If you get a good drop, you're going to have an advantage over the other players landing in the same spot as you. And on the flip side, if you get a bad drop, then obviously you're going to be at a disadvantage. And what I'm going to talk about is mainly going to be about for landing in Battle Royale. Reload mode functions a bit differently because you can get lower to the ground before you actually get glider locked. And the way gliding works in Fortnite is a little confusing to some people, or a little punishing for people who don't really understand it. But basically, when you jump out of the battle bus, you can open and close your glider as you wish until you reach a certain distance to the ground. And this is what is known as glider lock. And at this point, you won't be able to close the glider anymore. Once you get glider locked, you're stuck with your glider out until you land. And when you have your glider out, you move slower and descend slower than if you are just actually diving. And I believe the distance for glider lock is about 100 meters to the ground. It doesn't really matter. It's just, it is what it is. And there is a little line next to the minimap when you're landing that shows when glider lock will happen. There's like an elevation thing, and then there's that little line. Again, this is something I really don't pay that much attention to. What's important to note is that when gliding, the distance you get glider locked is from your character to the ground under them, not some set consistent ground level measure. So if you fly over a mountain, for example, the game considers you to be closer to the ground, and so you can get glider locked at a higher altitude and then stuck at that position. If you're trying to land on the mountain, that's okay, but if you're trying to land at a POI, flying over that mountain and getting glider locked at a higher altitude can like really grief your drop. And then the flip side of this is that diving over water allows you to get glider locked at a lower altitude, because the game doesn't consider the water to be ground. It considers the ground that's actually under the water to be ground level. So once you are glider locked, you will have to continue gliding until you reach the ground, as I already said. So it's best to get glider locked near your POI and then glide to where you want to be, rather than getting glider locked above the POI. And this is one mistake a lot of players make early on, because like I said, the landing in Fortnite is kind of weird, but they jump out of the bus and then they dive straight at their POI because that's where they're going. And then they get glider locked above it and then just kind of have to fly around in circles, whereas someone who got glider locked at a better spot is probably going to have a much better landing. I'm going to have on screen now what a drop map is. These are used in competitive, so players can guarantee that they get the best drop. And the markers on this are the ideal place to get glider locked to have a perfect landing for where the blue marker is on the POI. And you'll see that these markers aren't actually on the blue part. Like, they're trying to get glider locked on that yellow ping. So they're going to dive straight at that rather than diving straight at the blue thing. And I think worrying about the exact numbers or using drop maps for public matches is kind of extra. Like, you really don't need to do that. I was mainly just showing the drop map to explain, so you get an idea of how to land. Not every drop in a public match has to be perfect. As long as it's good or fine, that's usually, good enough. But I was mainly just showing the drop map to kind of show that you want to get glider locked near the POI, not exactly where you're actually trying to go. And the short of all of this is just that you want to get glider locked a little bit away from your POI and then glide to where you actually want to land, and be mindful of what you're diving over. Getting glider locked on a low altitude will allow you to actually be lower when you forced your glider out, and then you should hit the ground sooner. And that is going to be happening most often if you're diving over bodies of water. Diving over mountains or high ground is often not ideal. And I think this is just something you really get a feel for over time, and just knowing and being aware of kind of these little bits of information that I talked about. I think can go a long way in improving your drops. As I said at the start of the video, landing in Fortnite is kind of weird, and some people don't understand these things naturally, and so it takes a while for them to learn to land. I've talked about this before on stream, and people want like exact numbers on when you get glider locked and how long you can glide after getting glider locked. I think it's something you really just get a feel for over time. And as I said, not every drop needs to be perfect in a public match. Nobody is really using drop maps in pubs. That's something that's more of like a competitive high-end like tournament thing. One thing that I do think you need to make note of when you're landing is how many other players are landing in the POI, and then where in the POI with you they're landing. And you don't need to be perfect with this, but just getting a general idea is fine. Like if you know, okay, there's a lot of people landing here, that's going to affect how you play. Whereas like if you're landing and you see nobody else, you hear nobody else, and you probably know you're somewhat safe, you still want to be on guard, but you know, it's completely different seeing nobody at all versus a lot of people, and that those things will really affect how you play. And then same, like I said, where they're going. If you see a bunch of people landing all at the same spot of the POI, that those people are probably going to be scuffed, and you're going to be able to third party it. The flip side, if a lot of people are landing at the same spot you wanted to go to, maybe you veer off to like a different building or something. And the visualize audio sound effects setting can actually be really good with this, because you'll get little indications around you of the glider audio. And as I said, you don't need to be perfect with exactly how many people are landing there and exactly where they're landing. But with visual audio, you can kind of see, okay, there's lots of gliders around me. This is a very populated area. And then, you know, if you see nothing, you see nothing. And then that is also useful information. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about as far as landing. Now, once you land, how you're going to play the game. The first thing is how to choose where you're going to land in the POI. The things I really care about is going to be loot density. If a building has like a lot of loot in a short confined space, that's very good. If it has some of the special chests, like this season, the elemental chests, those are very good because you get a weapon, heals. I think you have a chance to get the mask, the boons. Those chests are pretty high value. So if a POI has those elemental chests, that's going to be something that I want to go for. Also, if there's any barrels in the POI, I really like landing at buildings with barrels. Masked Meadows is going to be a decent example of this, because the building I land at has several barrels in it and under it. So I'm often able to get full shield very quickly without actually using my heals. Terrain advantages can also be a factor. If the building is very high up, you know, if you just automatically have high ground on the other spots in the POI, that's going to be good. The flip side of this, if you know that POI is very low ground or doesn't have much cover at all, or just naturally if everybody in the POI kind of focuses that spot, then that's going to be somewhere where you probably don't want to land. And then NPCs can also be a factor. If there's an NPC there that sells something you want, maybe you really want to hire the NPC, then that could, you know, affect where in the POI you actually want to land. And I think it's best to avoid landing in spots that just have one chest or like very little loot, like bad loot density, or they're very exposed. And one example of this I would have from this season is going to be the Typhoon Blade stand in the middle of Masked Meadows. And I go Masked Meadows a lot. It's my favorite POI. And not every game, but pretty often there will just be somebody landing on that Typhoon Blade because, you know, obviously they want the Typhoon Blade. It's a good item. But by doing this, they're putting themselves at a massive disadvantage because there's not very much cover in the center there, and they're getting only a sword. And so if somebody wants to shoot at them from any of the buildings, they have no way to really defend themselves, you know? And then even if they do grab the sword and then run to a building, it's likely that somebody landing at one of the buildings has more loot and more HP than them by the time they would get to them. So landing at, like, sure, the Typhoon Blade is high value, but like needing it off spawn like that, I think is griefing a lot of people's games. I've gotten a lot of kills this season just by shooting people as soon as they land on that. And as I said earlier, you want to make note or kind of be aware of how many people are landing at your POI, because this will really impact how you're going to play the game. How many people are there affects what you want to do. If your POI is very, very populated, you probably want to play a bit safer because you're very likely to get third-partied because there's so many people in close proximity. If the POI is very dead, you can play a bit more loose and a bit faster, knowing that, you know, you're not guaranteed to get third-partied. You still might get third-partied, but it's less guaranteed, you know? And then what also comes into play here is how many people landed on certain POI, certain sides. If you know one side of the POI, like let's say you landed on one side and you're the only one there, and then the other side is very populated, I would want to get looted up as fast as I can and then get ready to third party that very populated side of the POI, because with everybody competing for that same loot, all of them are going to get less loot, but also they're going to have to fight for it. And then that's going to mean that by the time I get there, I'm probably going to have more HP. I'm going to be in a better fighting chance, and I'm also being able to third party them. So that is kind of why I was saying that you really want to be aware of this. And then one mistake that I want to talk about that a lot of players make, and I am definitely guilty of this myself, is worrying too much about shooting players out of the sky, because, you know, it feels good to beam people out of the sky in this game. But in Zero Build, because of the overshield, it's a little harder to beam people out of the sky. And then if this is good or bad to go for, I think would really depend on how many people landed at the POI. If it's just you and that person that's in the sky, then cool, you can shoot them out of the sky, no problem. But if you're focused on shooting that person out of the sky, and then while you're doing that, 2 or 3 people are landing around you and getting more loot while you're just shooting at somebody who isn't an immediate threat, that's when it's going to be a problem. So if the POI is very, very populated, just trying to get that free kill out of the sky, while it might feel good, can often grief your game. Getting a gun off spawn is oftentimes going to be better than getting a chest. You sometimes just got to make do with what you can get. But if you know somebody's landing on a chest and there's a gun right next to them, you can often get that gun and eliminate them before they even, you know, get the weapon out of the chest, because they have to look at the chest, open it, see what it is, and then decide. And all that time, you're probably already shooting them. Breaking the ground or breaking things a chest are on can be faster than opening a chest in some instances. I'll have an example of this right now, but at Masked Meadows, there's these chests that are on weak structures that you can break in one pickaxe swing. And if you do this, you'll often get the loot faster and not have to like look at the chest and wait for it to open. And that can result in you just getting the gun a little bit faster and getting that elimination. And then the same is going to be true with breaking the ground if there's many things in the room you want, or if there's barrels. Again, I'll have another example of this on screen now, but at Masked Meadows, I like getting these 3 barrels right here and then going into the bottom to get the mask, right? And if I break each barrel individually, that's going to take much longer than just breaking the floor and getting all 3 barrels at once. And then I'm going down anyway, so it benefits me timing wise. So a lot of times getting barrels, if you just break the ground under it, you'll get all of those barrels much faster. Off spawn, usually close range weapons are going to be more valuable to me than something that's long range. This isn't as big of a deal this season because like the Hollow Twister AR, for example, is very versatile and can be used at close range just fine. But if I had the choice between getting a hunting rifle or a Surgefire SMG off spawn, I'm taking that Surgefire SMG every day, even though that isn't a weapon that I really care for. Just a lot of off spawn fights are going to be close range naturally. So the person who gets the close range weapons first has an advantage. And then timing is also going to be very important. As I already said, a lot of what I just talked about was about like kind of abusing third party timing or abusing kind of loot timing you have on other players. If you're able to get looted faster, then that's an advantage for you. And then like in terms of breaking the thing to get the chest or breaking the barrels, you save little bits of time doing that sometimes, but that can be the difference maker off spawn. If you have the gun half a second faster than your opponent, that gives you a huge advantage in that fight. There's 2 settings that could be pretty helpful for early game. The first is going to be preferred item slots. This allows you to assign certain weapon types to a certain inventory slot. And this just makes it a little bit faster and a little bit more seamless for you. If you grab a bunch of things, you probably won't have to worry about rearranging them. And then auto pickup is also going to be a setting that many players like for early game. This just makes it to where if you walk over a gun, you automatically pick it up, or any item. I don't use this. I used to. There's like rumors on whether or not it causes like delay with picking up loot. And then a lot of people don't like it because they think it's just going to automatically make them drop things. That's not how it is. If your inventory is full, auto pickup doesn't do anything to you. It's mainly just if you have an open space, it'll pick up what you walk over, and that could help you get a gun faster when landing. Or if you and an enemy are kind of 50-50ing a chest, then the loot pops out and you're touching it, it should just automatically go into your inventory. So auto pickup can be another setting that people like. Scroll wheel interact can also be a setting that I think a lot of people use for early game. This makes it to where this is a mouse and keyboard thing, but if you're flicking your scroll wheel like up, for example, you're constantly sending that input, so you can just do that while you swipe over things and get it faster. And again, that's a very small difference in timing, but those small differences in timing can play a huge role in the early game. After I've landed, I typically just want to get loot and then try to clear my POI. That is priority number 1 to me, is just looting up and then clearing the POI. And then I'll go for extra things after. And what I mean by extra things is going to be like the hidden room at Flooded Frogs, or now there's NPCs to fight at Masked Meadows. If there's bosses, I typically want to go for that after clearing the POI rather than just trying to rush it and getting third-partied. And I've noticed, you know, over the years, lots of players going for these extra things and they haven't made the area safe yet, and then they just end up losing. So like the room at Flooded Frogs, for example, can be hard to teleport into sometimes, and so you might just catch somebody going for that and get a free beam on them. If somebody's trying to eliminate a boss way too quickly and you're there, you're going to have a much easier time fighting them because they're putting their attention on that boss and, you know, investing ammo and potentially HP into it and stuff. So like catching the timing on people fighting those things makes your life a lot easier. But on the flip side of it, you want to just clear the POI before going for stuff like that, I think. And then as you learn a spot, you kind of learn where third parties are likely to come from and where you want to go afterwards. And this is something that talked about a lot in spectating videos, where I'll be watching people and they seemingly have no plan for what they want to do after they clear their POI. And it's not like everything needs to be set in stone and scripted, but I feel like you should have a decent idea of like where you want to go afterwards or what you want to do after your early game. That way you don't just waste a lot of time kind of doing nothing. And then one final thing I wanted to talk about that I forgot to, this kind of goes into like the timing being very important thing. Ammo boxes. I've gotten asked a bunch like why I don't open ammo boxes a lot, especially off spawn. And that is just going to be that little bit of timing I take to open the ammo box. It's not a lot, but if you do that, you know, 4, 5, 6 times over the course of your early game, that time adds up, and getting a few extra like medium bullets or light bullets often isn't going to be a huge deal breaker in the early game. And if you get a lot of eliminations, you'll get ammo that way. But either way, clearing the POI, I think, is more important. Having 100 AR bullets versus 250 probably isn't going to be the difference maker for off-spawn fights. And so I typically do kind of ignore the ammo boxes and stuff like that off-spawn, unless it's one of the big ones. Those are often worth it. Or if it's on something I can break, then sure. But focusing on that can be something that gets you bad timing later on. And that's just something I wanted to talk about because I've gotten asked about it a bunch. It's really not that deep, but that's why I rarely care that much about opening ammo boxes in the early game. But that is going to be it for this video. I hope you guys found this to be, you know, helpful, informative, interesting. As always, if you did, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.